Hi, in this asynchronous video lesson, we're going to cover three topics: the AP exam, AP classroom, and the instructional planning report. The AP exam is divided into two portions. The multiple choice, we've gone from a 100 to an 80 question multiple choice test. It still weighs the same and the amount of time is the same. So we know that the same amount of time with fewer questions means that students are going to be asked to do some of those higher level skills within the science practices. The multiple choice is divided into two parts: question sets and discrete items. The question sets are where there is a prompt or a stimulus, and then there is a set of three questions that all pertain to that prompt or stimulus. In terms of the free response, we've gone from a 4 to a 3 question FRQ section. Still weighs 40% of the exam, but the time has been reduced since there's one less question. We know exactly the topic of those three FRQs: design and investigation, focusing on proposing an environmental solution, and analyzing an environmental problem and proposing a solution, doing calculations. This year's online exam, the entire exam consisted only of these two free response questions. The weighing of the exam, this information is on all of the, in your CED, when you look at everything from the course at a glance to the unit at a glance to the topic pages. I guess the topic pages don't break it down, but the course at a glance and the unit at a glance tells you the amount of weight, and remember the number of class periods that you should spend on each unit. I'm going to come back to this idea of Unit 9, global change, how important that is, how much it weighs on our exam. And that's another reason that I really like to take those topics and infuse and disperse them throughout the curriculum, because it's so heavily assessed. In terms of science practices, you can also see the breakdown of the weighing. And again, all of this is in your CED at the very end after the curricular materials. Couple things we'll point out: that environmental solutions weighs heavily on the FRQ, as it does overall, which is awesome. Concept explanation is obviously the most heavily weighed part of the multiple choice exam, and we'll do a short session on text analysis. This is only assessed in the multiple choice, and there's only a few questions, so we'll talk about that a little bit later in the week. I've been starting to refer to the term task verbs, because all those science practices that we do are going to be translating into task verbs, where a student on their free response question, they're always from here on out going to know exactly what those task verbs are. I will just point out to you that these two task verbs were a big challenge for students on this year's exam, so something we'll talk about a lot this week. To start the year, I print this out and I have students keep it in their binder, and I let them use it until they really decide they don't even need it anymore. They self-decide, I know what those terms mean. The biggest thing we'll talk about is the confusion between description and describing and explaining. Describing, presenting relevant characteristics, and explaining why or explaining how. This is kind of an interesting point about when do I start giving FRQ. And as you glance down this sample question, and you may want to pause the video for a minute or look back through the PowerPoint, we've got this great biogeochemical cycle question, which we should do well on, because we just spent a lot of time talking about all of these processes that move atoms through different components of ecosystems. But notice when I work my way through the storyline of the FRQ, so to speak, that I start getting into real more content on human disruptions to the carbon cycle and some of those solutions. I would pick and choose parts of this FRQ and use it early in the year. I would never start off the year by giving a student that whole 10-point FRQ. It's just a little bit intimidating to them. So let's shift gears a little bit and take a look at what you're going to be able to see in AP Classroom if and when, if you already have it, or if you will soon be teaching the course and have access to that. This is a picture of my dashboard, so I can see that my exams that my students took were posted, and we're going to talk about a number of these different tabs. and what all of those, the kind of information all of those are going to give you. The first thing that we look at is kind of the home page. What I would see down below here, I would see all of the different units, and I could start to pick out topic questions. I could click on there and look at specific topic questions by a unit. Each of these units, I can also pull down the topic page and get the corresponding topic questions. It's going to show me where those appear, and I can actually add them to a quiz if I would like. Again, this is kind of hard to visualize if you don't have a classroom dashboard yet, but it's very intuitive and very easy to use. It was a little clunky. There was a few glitches. This last year was our first year with it, and they are constantly improving and upgrading and getting rid of those glitches. So on the progress dashboard, I could pull down and look at all of my classes here. Students log in, they get a code from you at the beginning of the year to join that specific class, and these are the 3 sections that I had last year, and your AP coordinator like sets this part up for you. This is done through your school system. I did not have to populate and tell which students were in each of those sections. That is auto-populated for you. You just need to give that students the code then to join that classroom. Just quickly kind of go through and point out to you that these topic questions are aligned with this idea of spiraling and scaffolding. So if I'm looking at concept explanation, and I'm going to do this first letter A of that skill, simply describing a concept or a process, I can pick out a question that matches that level of skill. I can then work, and they give you the correct response and the explanation for it. And this is something that's really critical and super helpful as students are going through. Well, I see I got it wrong, but I still don't understand why I got it wrong. I can then work up to a higher level skill, explaining environmental concepts and processes. So I'm not just identifying what geothermal energy is, I'm getting a little bit deeper into how that works. And then I can get to that highest level of that scaffold in an applied context. So really valuable information for you to pick and choose some really good questions. You can, again, I don't need to read this to you. You can stop and spend a little bit of time reading this through the PowerPoint if you'd like, just about implementation and how you're going to use those topic questions, bell ringers, exit tickets, things like that. And then let's talk a little bit about the personal progress checks. So every unit you can see at the bottom here, we talked about this early on. I can see what those personal progress checks are. I'm going to just be honest with you that I did not use the personal progress checks. I give formative assessments, but this one whole unit has got a lot of topics, and I might in this unit have 2 or 3 different formative assessments. And the thing about the personal progress checks is that I can't break them apart and pull out the individual questions from them. I can do that on my own, but I can't pull up a personal progress check for unit 1 and click only which questions I want to use. I have to, if I'm going to administer it through my AP Classroom and assign personal progress check unit 1, I have to use it in its entirety. I can still access the questions in there and kind of cobble them out and put them into my own formative assessment. And we'll be talking more about assessment throughout the week, and I can answer questions about how I use those. Just a couple of notes on the personal progress checks in terms of implementation. And again, this is kind of just what I was alluding to. They have to be assigned as a full set. And this is very important. This is a couple of slides from the College Board I'm using here, that because these personal progress checks are formative, they cannot be used to assign a grade or evaluate a teacher. And they're used just as a formative check to see how students are doing. The most valuable part of your classroom you're going to find is the question bank. Look at all of these different ways I can filter for questions. There's every question that has ever been administered on an AP exam is in this question bank. And I did some item tagging for the College Board. So I went through and clicked all the little boxes for every question and then collaborated with a colleague to make sure where those fit. So I can search by unit number 9 on environmental or on sustainability and search for a particular topic. And that's a drop-down menu that will let me dial in to topic 9.1. I can search by my practice or skill. I can say, I need some good multiple choice questions that assess that being able to interpret science reading or science literature content. I can search by the type of question, multiple choice or FRQ, or I can even put in a word search here. There's a great FRQ on elephants that I'll be showing you. And so I can say, oh, we've probably looked at it. So I can say, hey, any question you have about elephants, I want to take a look at. So this is really helpful. And I can then use those questions to build an exam that I would use for a summative exam. And again, just all of those ways that I can search, and it's going to narrow that search for me. The last topic that we'll take a look at during this this virtual lesson is your instructional planning report. And again, I'm going to let you read through this. I've got to share this information with you. If you've never taught the course, you're just going to start to be like, oh my God, I don't even understand the exam. How am I going to understand the AP instructional report? So I'm going to show you just the big idea here. And know that if you taught the course this year, you're not going to get an instructional planning report because the exam just didn't assess a lot of what would normally be on here. So you can look at how I use my instructional planning report to find where there's gaps, where students didn't do very well on a particular topic, and get a lot of feedback on how I alter my instruction for the following year. So you can get this on your AP Central homepage. And again, just some of the different things that are going to be available here. This, I'll just show you an example. This is from my previous year's instructional planning report. So it shows me my group distribution, my percent of 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. This is where I'm starting to compare my students to other students. So of the 42% of my students that earned a 5 in the state of Wisconsin, 13.3% did, and globally only 9.1% did. And I know a lot of us, this is our goal. How the heck do you get all those kids in the 4 and 5 range? It also tells me, and this is really where I spend the most amount of my time, is it's going through all of the different units, and it's telling me the number of questions that were on there. This is the previous year, so these units don't look the same. Remember that this is from not this current year where we first adopted new curriculum. This would have been the 2019 exam. And so it tells me all the questions from that unit, how my group scored on that, the maximum number correct, versus the state versus the global. And so this is where I spend a lot of time. Like, even though I'm above the state and global level, it looks like I have a little bit of room for improvement in global change. Population, my students do really well on. They're very strong there. My students typically tend to do well in the pollution category. I'm not sure where, oh, pollution. Yeah, a little lower that year. So this is where I can really get a lot of information about how I can change in areas that I need to beef up my instruction a little bit. These were the 4 FRQs that were administered the previous year. And again, you can see my average out of 10 versus the state and global mean. And we'll talk about, you're like, well, that looks like a pretty low score. We'll talk about benchmarks and where those scores end up. So thanks for joining me for that virtual lesson. I'm guessing you're going to have a lot of questions that we'll have time to address in our next live session. See you later.